What if I told you the band Metallica basically built their sound on, got completely written out of the story? They fired their drummer for wanting to make more money, saw the biggest songs become stadium anthems, and for other bands, while they struggled for cash and had their entire career end with the frontman collapsing in a Polish hospital. Here's how Budgie became heavy metal's most important ghost.
Like, subscribe. Thank you.
So there's this band from Cardiff, Wales, right? It's 1967, and the music scene is what it is. The main guy is a Burke Shelley, who sings and plays bass, Tony Bourge on guitar, and Ray Phillips on drums. Burke had decided that he wanted to be a musician when he was 12 after seeing some Christian band, which is a weird place to start for a guy who would front one of the heaviest bands of the 70s. He started on bass, switched to drums, and then switched back. So he finally lands with these guys, and they call themselves Hill's Contemporary Grass for a while. Then they land on Budgie. Burke picked it because he said it was diametrically opposed to their sound. He thought it was funny, especially having this tiny, colorful bird as a name for this huge, loud, sludgy noise. But for a minute, they almost called themselves 6-Ton Budgie, which honestly might have been a bit better. So they hook up with this producer, Roger Bain, who just did the first 2 Black Sabbath albums. So you figure, okay, these guys are on the right track. They go into Rockfield Studios to record their first album, and they get exactly 3 days to do it. 3 days. The whole thing sounds like it was recorded under a pile of wet blankets, muffled, murky, but it was heavy and weird. Burke Shelley's voice wasn't like anybody else's. Wasn't this low growl. Certainly wasn't like Ozzy. It was this super high-pitched scream, almost a wail. And their song titles were nuts, like Nude Disintegrating Parachutist Woman. So it's got that real cool sludgy sound to it. But they're just a strange band from the jump. On that first album, they'd slam me with a heavy track like Guts, and then right after it, they'd stick in the slow acoustic song. Pacing was all wrong, but they didn't care. They were already too heavy for the rock kids and too odd for the metalheads who were just figuring out what metal was. A year later, 1972, they put out their second album, Squawk. This time they got a whole week in the studio. Total luxury. Sound was a little cleaner, bit more progressive. It had one of those classic minimalist Roger Dean covers, which gave them some extra prog rock cred. But then in 1973, they released Never Turn Your Back on a Friend. And this thing, total masterpiece. This is the one. They produce it themselves and it just works out. It's got this incredible 11-minute song called Parents, a track people still argue is their best work. And it has the song that should have defined them forever, Breadfan. It's this frantic, insane song about people who are obsessed with money. And the riff, of course, is just bonkers. Fast, heavy, complex, way ahead of its time. On the first pressings of the album, they even stuck with a bit of Winston Churchill's speech at the beginning of the song, but they had to take it off later because of copyright. We love good old copyright. The album had everything. Had the songs, the sound, their classic logo, the cool cover art. This should have been their ticket to the big time, the moment. And right when they should have been taking off, the whole thing starts to fall apart. Immediately after releasing their best album, the band starts to crack. Ray Phillips, the original drummer, gets kicked out. And years later, he'd say the reason was because he wanted the band to actually become more commercial. He saw the labels getting rich and he wanted a piece of it. And for that, they sent him packing. I mean, he might be the first person in rock history to get canned for wanting to be successful. The irony is just too thick. So he's out, and they bring in Pete Boot. They rush back in the studio and bang out the album In for the Kill in 1974. It's their only album to ever hit the top 30 in the UK. But it was a mess. Pete Boot's drumming was, let's say, rough and ready. Some people actually found it grating. But the album had this raw bulldozer energy. The title track was a monster. Another song, Crash Course in Brain Surgery, was a short shock of pure metal. They were getting somewhere, but the foundation was cracked. What's interesting is that the vocals actually remind me a bit of Shannon Hoon from Blind Melon, but definitely totally different music genre than that. So anyways, Pete Boot doesn't last. By the end of the year, he's gone. And this new drummer, Steve Williams, comes in. And Steve, he's good. Way more versatile, came from playing funk, Latin rhythms, so he comes in with this whole new flavor, stabilizes the band, and they make an album called Bandolier in 1975, and it's great, one of their best. Feels like they're actually back on track. Now for the next one, if I were Britannia, I'd waive the rules. They were just getting even weirder, adding a funk vibe, hints of Steely Dan. One track even had the guitarist singing lead, which didn't go over too well, but they were getting somewhere. Things are looking good, until again, another piece breaks off. After one more album, 1978's Impeccable, the co-founder, the riff guy, Tony, just quits. He's had enough of the road, enough of the bullshit. And that was a huge deal. Burke's writing partner, the guy who was the other half of the creative team, he's just gone. The band's a wreck. They just moved to A&M Records because their old label wasn't promoting them, but it didn't matter. Burke said later that they were spending more time with lawyers and dealing with divorces than they were with music. The album cover for Impeccable perfectly summed it up. It's this drawing of a cat trying to eat a budgie. And there it is in the flesh. That's actually a pretty cool cover. But some people thought it was awful. Others thought it was just brilliant for the sheer balls of it. But after that album, the new label A&M drops them. No contract or guitarist. They're basically screwed. Megadeth would later cover Melt the Ice Away from this album. Another seed of influence planted while the band itself was dying on the vine. Budgie's version, you could already hear the contrast in the guitars, obviously, because they did it well before Megadeth did, but the same feel and the vibe is still there. Yeah, both versions are pretty awesome. But what happens next is almost a comedy. They hire this guy, Rob Kendrick, who talks them into firing another guy they just hired. And then Kendrick takes them to Texas for what's supposed to be a tour and just runs up a massive debt. Whole thing is a total disaster. They have to come home with their tails between their legs, broke. They fire Kendrick, but not before making him play a whole tour just to pay them back the money that he lost them. At this point, they're just in sad shape, and they're about to pack it in. But then this guitarist, Big John Thomas, shows up. And this guy, he basically saves them. Very bluesy player. Loved Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, and he pushed Budgie's sound to be much more up-tempo. At the same time, this whole new wave of British heavy metal thing is happening. And all these new bands, Iron Maiden, Saxon, are popping up, and suddenly Budgie's sound is cool again. They're the old guard, the Godfathers. They get a new record deal, put out an album called Power Supply. And it's pure heavy metal, fast and loud, more like Judas Priest. One song even sounded like Burke was doing a David Lee Roth impression. The album cover was super weird, but it worked. And their next one, Night Flight, even had cover art by Derek Riggs, the guy who did all the famous Iron Maiden covers. Yeah, if you look at Night Flight, definitely has a lot of the same color schemes that some of the Iron Maiden albums had, so it is pretty obvious. So Budgie is back from the dead. They end up on tour with none other than Ozzy Osbourne, right when he's at his peak with Randy Rhoads. And they're in the middle of all the madness. Steve Williams tells this story about Ozzy banging on the hotel door one night, hiding from Sharon with a bottle of brandy. And Burke and Steve just let him in, lied for him, and then sat there all night while Ozzy told him his life story. They're in the big leagues. And then they do something incredible. In 1982, they go to Poland. They're the first heavy band to ever play behind the Iron Curtain, while the country is under martial law. And they're treated like the Beatles. People are going crazy. For a band from Wales that could never catch a break at home, this was it. They were heroes. It was the highest they would ever fly. And then, of course, they crashed. The next album, Deliver Us From Evil, was a big push for commercial success. It was all political. An attack on the Cold War with lyrics about NORAD, Doomsday City, Finger on the Button. They brought in the keyboard player, Duncan McKay, for the first time. They're trying to sound like a big 80s rock band. The song Bored with Russia was written for them, not even by them. It was a calculated move to get on the radio, and it completely backfired. The fans hated it. It's too slick, too polished. Even Steve Williams admitted later it was a mistake. And after that album, their label RCA dropped them. And that was the end of their line. They couldn't get another deal. Burke was tired. He had a family. The band just fizzled out. No big goodbye or farewell tour. Around 1988, that was it. And here's where the story gets really weird. The band is dead, but the music is about to become more famous than ever. In 1987, this little band Metallica, who were on their way to becoming the biggest thing in the world, released an EP called Garage Days Revisited. And on it is a blistering version of Crash Course in Brain Surgery. A year later, they put out Breadfan as the B-side to Harvester of Sorrow. They're playing these songs in stadiums every single night. They put both songs in their multi-million-selling 1988 cover album, Garage Inc. Budgie's name is out there, but it's Metallica's logo on the t-shirt. And the story that says it all is about their old drummer, Ray Phillips, the guy they fired for wanting to be famous. Well, he's older now. His post-Budgie band, Tredegar, was a financial disaster that lost him $40,000. And so he's in a really bad way. And then out of nowhere, these giant checks start showing up in his mailbox. Royalties from Metallica's cover of Breadfan, the song he made decades ago, played by another band, literally saves him from being broke. And that's Budgie's entire story in a nutshell. And what just Metallica? Iron Maiden covered I Can't See My Feelings, so you could totally hear Budgie's influence on that one. And then Soundgarden covered Homicidal Suicidal. Chris Cornell, the one guy who could definitely was able to nail that range 100%. Van Halen used to play In for the Kill in the early club days. The sound was everywhere. Thrash, grunge, just everywhere. But the band itself was a ghost. Burke got them back together in the 90s because he needed the cash, with a guy named Rob Congo Jones on the drums. They played to small crowds of diehards in Texas who knew them just from the liner notes of Metallica albums. They officially reformed in 99 and even released one final album in 2006, You're All Living in Cuckoo Land. It had a weird digitized drum sound and felt more like a Burke Shelley solo project. Didn't make a splash, and for a while they even had Craig Goldie, Dio's guitar player, playing with them. They had the respect of their peers, but they just could not catch a break. The final chapter is just brutal. November 2010, they're on tour back in Poland, the scene of their biggest triumph, and Burke Shelley collapses. He has a 6-centimeter aortic aneurysm, a ticking time bomb in his chest. The tour is over. The band is over. For good this time. He had surgery, but it wrecked his diaphragm, so he couldn't really sing anymore. Later, when doctors found another aneurysm, he refused the operation. He just didn't want to go through the hell of it. He also suffered from a painful condition called Stickler syndrome. He knew the risks of more surgery and that it could paralyze him, and he basically said, I just want to live the life, what I have left, and not be crippled. It was a brave choice for sure. John Thomas died in 2016 from pneumonia. Pete Boot died in 2018 after battling Parkinson's. And on January 10th, 2022, Burke Shelley died. It was all over. So yeah, they wrote the songs, they had the sound, everybody else got famous off of it. The guys in Budgie were the pioneers who got left behind in the trail. In the end, they really didn't get too much, but they certainly left one hell of a dent on music in general. Got the full version of this one up on my Patreon. Left the link below in the description. Come be a member, because hopefully I could get away with a hell of a lot more up there. Thanks for watching.